I was driving home one night after finishing my evening shift at the carpentry shop where I work. It was just past midnight, probably around 12:10 or so. I live in a pretty remote area in Latvia, surrounded by fields and thick forests. There aren't many houses around, and at night, you barely see a soul. I was on a stretch of road just minutes from home, with a rye field on one side and dense woods on the other. It was the middle of summer, a mild night, around 75 degrees, so I had the top down on my car. I was cruising at about 50 miles per hour when I suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream. A woman, screaming in a way that chilled me to the bone. I slammed on the brakes without thinking. For a second, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to echo all around me. Then I heard it again. It's definitely coming from the woods on my left, a female voice shouting, "Help." I jumped out of my car, grabbed a metal rod I keep behind the seat, and ran toward the trees. "Who's out there?" I shouted. She immediately called back, "Please, help me." I began running into the forest, pushing through branches and tripping over roots. I kept yelling for her to keep screaming so I could find her, and she did. Every 10 seconds or so, she'd cry out again, her voice shaking with fear. But no matter how deep I went into the forest, the voice didn't get any closer. It didn't get louder. It stayed at the exact same distance, like she was moving with me, or worse, like she wasn't real at all. I yelled, "Tell me where you are." 5 seconds later, she screamed, "Help," again. But by then, something in me had shifted. My gut twisted. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I turned around and ran back toward the road. Branches scraped my face, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to the car. I could see the red glow of my taillights between the trees. But as I ran, I could still hear her screaming. Always to my left. Always the same distance. Like she was following me. Like she was attached to me. I jumped into my car, slammed the door, and sped off without a second thought. My hands were shaking. I called the rural police as soon as I had signal again, told them what happened near Route 52, close to the Msvaldi turnoff. I didn't stick around. I was too shaken up. I told a few friends and my sister, and they all said it was probably some twisted prank, or maybe even an animal mimicking a human voice. I almost believed that, till a week later. The local news reported that a woman in her early 30s had been found dead by a mushroom forager in that same area. No visible signs of trauma, no clear cause of death, just lying there, alive. No, that forest is huge, and it could be a coincidence. But every time I drive past that bend now, I turn off the radio, and I listen. I was driving up to a friend's cabin in the Slovenian mountains for a quiet weekend getaway. His name's Adam. We planned a couple of days of hiking and relaxing in the snow. I owned 2 vehicles back then, a Skoda Octavia sedan and an old 2007 Nissan Navara pickup, which is what I was driving that night. In the truck bed, I had our gear and supplies, about 40 minutes from the cabin. Sometime after 1 a.m., the road was totally deserted. Snow was falling thick, steady flakes, and everything was dead silent. The only sound was my engine and the soft crunch of tires on fresh snow. Unfortunately, that damn truck had already given me issues in the past. And right there, in the middle of nowhere, the temperature gauge started climbing fast straight into the red. I slowed down, pulled over, and shut the engine off, hoping it would cool down after about 10 minutes. I started it again, but the problem didn't go away. A few miles later, the engine was overheating again. So I pulled over once more. I got out, flashlight in hand, and popped the hood. But with all the falling snow, I couldn't see much. It's the worst part. No cell signal at all. It was completely cut off. I climbed back into the cab, turned the heat on, and let the engine idle. Luckily, it wasn't overheating, as long as I didn't drive, okay? But the moment I tried moving, red line again. 15 minutes later, a car finally approached through the snowfaller, small gray Renault Clio. I hit the hazards and stepped out, waving it down. The driver stopped and rolled down his window. Looked about 30, scruffy beard, wool beanie. I quickly explained that my truck was overheating and asked if I could use his phone. He stared at me for a second before asking, "Are you alone?" I hesitated, then said yes. He handed over the phone. He must have been local because he had signal. I called Adam, told him what happened, and he gave me the number of a small garage nearby that he'd used before. Then he said he'd come pick me up. During both calls, the guy in the Clio just stared at me, didn't blink, didn't say a word. I gave him back the phone and thanked him. He just muttered, "No problem," rolled up the window, and drove off into the snowy darkness. I got back in the truck and turned off the headlights for a moment just to see how dark it really was, and I saw absolutely nothing. Complete, suffocating blackness. I waited. A few minutes passed. Then, suddenly a loud thud on the passenger side window. I jumped, turned my head. A figure was standing there. A man in a heavy coat, hood up, yelling, "Please, let me in. I'm freezing." He tried the door handle, but it was locked. Grabbed my flashlight and shined it on him, barely visible through the frost-covered glass. His voice was desperate, saying he was lost and couldn't find the road, but something about him felt off. His tone wasn't panicked, okay? It was hungry, predatory. I asked where he came from, no answer. He just kept yanking the handle, harder now, and started pounding on the window. At that point, pure instinct kicked in. I threw it into drive and floored it. As I pulled away, I could still hear him banging. But I didn't care, just needed to get the hell out of there. A few minutes later, as I crested a hill, I spotted a car parked on the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was the same gray Clio. I slowed down, rolled down my window. No one was inside, but there were fresh footprints in the snow behind it leading straight back toward where I'd broken down. That man was the same guy who lent me his phone. By now, my truck was barely holding up, but I didn't care. I kept driving until I saw the flashing lights of a tow truck coming down the road. It was the garage Adam had called. I flashed my headlights until they pulled over. I told the driver what happened. He made a nervous joke like, "Guess I got here just in time, huh?" Then asked if the man had a weapon. I said I didn't know. "All the more reason to move fast," he replied. While he hooked up the truck, the Clio never passed us. He must have turned around. 15 minutes later, we were heading toward the cabin. I used the driver's phone to call Adam again. We ended up having our weekend, though I barely slept that first night. The shop replaced a busted water pump. I sold the truck 2 weeks later, and I learned that night that when your gut screams at you, listen, because if I'd opened that door, I might not be here to tell you this. I used to work as a night security guard at a small, abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Brno, Czech Republic. It was a forgotten place, an old textile factory that had shut down years ago. A real estate company had bought the property, but until they got the green light for demolition, I was there to prevent intrusions and vandalism. It was my 4th shift cold winter night. No wind. I had my usual setup, an old portable radio, some snacks, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee. The only building with electricity was the former gatehouser, decaying prefab with barely functioning heat and a view over the entire yard. Around 2 a.m., I was doing my second patrol. I had a routine: cross the yard, check the warehouse doors, then pass behind the office building, which always gave me a weird feeling. That's when I noticed it. A window on the second floor was lit, faint yellow light, flickering like a candle. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to see if it was a reflection or some trick of the eye. But no, the light was real, and it was moving. I grabbed my flashlight and started up the internal stairs, which creaked under my boots. The air smelled of mold and dust. On the second floor, the hallway was dark and completely silent. The light was coming from one of the rooms at the end. I walked slowly, trying not to make a sound. When I peeked through the doorway, there was no one inside. Just a candle burning on top of an old filing cabinet, and something drawn on the wall. It was a symbol. I had never seen it before. It looked like a broken spiral with concentric lines and marks resembling runes. Beneath it, there was a sentence written in Old Czech. I couldn't read it. I stepped inside, and the candle went out on its own. There was no breeze, no open windows, nothing. I can't explain it, but I suddenly felt cold, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I spun around. I saw a shadow pass down the hallway. Tall, thin, with something on its head. A mask. I ran out of the room, flashlight raised, but the corridor was empty. No footsteps, no noise. I went straight back to the gatehouse and called my supervisor. I told him everything, and he said in a low voice, "You're not the first one to see something like that in there." 2 weeks earlier, another guard had quit without notice. He claimed he saw someone in the office building who didn't walk, but floated. The next night, they sent another guard to work with me, but we didn't last long. 2 days later, during our final patrol, we found the same candle burning in the same spot. But this time, on the wall, written in perfect letters, was, "Go back to where you came from." I didn't even bother turning in a resignation letter. I just left the keys on the table and never came back. I don't know if they ever tore that place down. But I do know this: some buildings don't want to be disturbed. My name is Luca, and what I'm about to tell you happened in 2014. When I worked as a delivery driver for a Mexican restaurant in an industrial suburb near Bilbao, Spain. It was 11 at night, and I had just received the last delivery of the night. A house isolated among the hills, about 20 minutes from the city. I set the GPS and left. It was raining off and on, the road narrow and winding, full of potholes. After a while, the GPS signal was lost, so I relied on the directions the customer had written in the order note. I kept driving until I saw an old, rusty gate open, with a dirt driveway leading to a large house immersed in darkness. As soon as I got out of the car, I had a strange feeling. No lights on, no sounds, just the noise of rain hitting the leaves. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again. After a few seconds, the door slowly opened by itself with a metallic creak. "Hello," I called out loud. No answer. I hesitated, but then entered. The house was bare, cold, with a strange smell like rotten wood and wet earth. On the floor of the hallway, there was a shopping bag open. Inside were a phone, a pair of women's shoes, and a stained blanket. I didn't understand. I was about to leave and return to the car when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy. I froze. Then a weak voice. "I'm here." I took the phone from my pocket and started recording, more out of instinct than courage. I slowly climbed the stairs, trying not to make noise. Every step creaked. Upstairs, there was only a hallway with 3 doors. I opened the first, empty. The second, a ruined bathroom. The third was locked. I knocked. No answer. I slowly opened it. Inside, there was a completely empty room, except for a chair in the center. On that chair, tied up with belts, was a woman. Her eyes were wide open, trembling. I immediately began untying her, telling her I would free her. But she screamed, "No, it's still here." I didn't understand at first. Then I felt something move behind me. I turned around, saw nothing, but the door slammed shut violently on its own. I tried to open it, but it was locked. The woman kept repeating, "It doesn't want me to leave. It doesn't want you to tell." Suddenly, the room's light went out. There was a noise like a deep breath, but not human. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight, but the screen was black. The device was dead. Something brushed the back of my neck. I ran at the door, hitting it with all my strength until it gave way. I took the woman in my arms and rushed down the stairs. The house seemed bigger, longer, as if the rooms multiplied. But finally, I found the exit, and we fled to my car. I drove nonstop to the nearest emergency room. When I told the police everything, they went back with me. But the house was empty. No trace of the chair, the woman, or the bag, as if it never happened. But she existed. She was beside me, alive, and she had the marks of those belts on her wrist. I never found out who or what was in that house. But since then, I don't make deliveries outside the city anymore. And I never enter a house if the door opens by itself. Never again.